Take my love, take my land, take me where I cannot stand. I don't care, I'm still free to play. You can't take my draft from me. Take me out to the black, tell them I ain't coming back. Burn the land and boil the sea. You can't take my draft from me. Some of you out there may already be aware that I've been on Arena basically since the very beginning, barring about 2.5 weeks or so in the closed beta that it took me to finagle up an invite. Yeah, that's right. To be in that closed beta, you had to be invited. So if you weren't on the Pro Tour, you basically had to know someone who was. Like I said, about 2.5 weeks is all I really missed on Arena. And at the very beginning, all we had was quick draft. Well, honestly, we didn't even have draft at the very beginning, but it was the first thing that was added fairly quickly. And it's what we would now think of as quick draft. And that was it. And it was only for the most recent set, and it only changed when a new set was released. Since then, of course, they have added tons of not only draft, but various limited options, diversifying from that quick draft over to a premier where you're drafting against live people, traditional draft where it's best of 3 instead of simply best of 1. And of course, that doesn't even count things like premier flashback drafts, cube drafts, drafts that blend multiple mix-up environments, or even the alchemy-infused premier draft that we see in most non-Universes Beyond seasons. But as much as things have changed over the years, we may be seeing the biggest changes now. Draft is under a lot of pressure from things like golden packs to continuously demonstrate its value in growing a collection, as well as an entertainment form in its own right. We are also getting ready to see the Pick 2 draft. And although we might see it in the Edge of Eternity season, I think it's much more likely that that will be introduced in the Spider-Man season, which is, believe it or not, just 7 weeks away. Less than that by the time this releases. I've even heard whispers from certain wizards living on the coast that is going to be the only draft environment offered during the Spider-Man season, but I haven't been able to substantiate that just yet. So today we are going to be taking a long, hard look at the Edge of Eternities limited environment and putting together a draft plan for the budget, value-oriented players out there. But before we get into all that, allow me to take a moment for some real talk. You're most likely here at the Stronghold because you've taken notice of the value-oriented content that I make. It may seem out of this world, but the truth is mid-range channels like this only make it thanks to viewer support. The reality is YouTube simply doesn't do enough ad share, profit sharing to cover even basic cost of operations for a channel like mine. I've never envisioned the Stronghold as a way to make money, but having it reach a level of self-sufficiency would be really nice. And hey, I'm all about value, and that effort doesn't fall short in my Patreon. For as little as a $1 a month pledge, you get access to additional content, analysis, and tools, as well as a shout out in most every YouTube video I produce. The list and draft analysis alone could easily add $1 or more to your collection every month. Best of all, your support goes right back into the channel and the expanding content I produce. There's a link to my Patreon page in the description below, so I'd appreciate it if you take a moment and check it out. Every bit of support, no matter how small, makes a huge difference to our future. Thanks so much for your time and consideration. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Once upon a time, doing draft on Arena, particularly a value draft methodology, was the way to not only grow your collection, but more specifically, make sure you had play sets of the lower rarity cards, i.e. your commons and uncommons. This always made sure that you had playable standard budget decks and freed up your wild cards to do other things like backfilling older standard sets that you weren't around for, or growing into the eventual new formats that were introduced on Arena, like historic and so forth. Nowadays, however, using draft in this manner is almost a mathematical impossibility. Standard has grown so large and has so many cards, and sets are introduced so rapidly, giving us such short seasons, that there is basically not enough time in the day to use drafting in a manner to make sure you get all those lower rarity play sets. Instead, now drafting is the way to make sure you get the right cards early enough in the season that you have time to play not only the format of limited, but start testing budget decks for standard and other formats. Otherwise, you might not finish these play sets and things until long after the season has ended. This, of course, all boils down to now more than ever, it's important to go into draft, and particularly quick draft, with a plan, know what's going on and what you're there for. Before we get into the details of this particular set, it's important to understand the evaluation process that goes into these archetypes, because we, particularly as budget players, need to make sure that we're maximizing all of that marginal utility to get the very most out of our in for our buck, so to speak. Way more important than it is for players that are not as budget minded. So there are three main factors that I use to evaluate a limited archetype, and they're not presented here in any particular order. And in fact, depending upon your limited environment, these will shift in relative importance. But first, I'd like to talk about value, and that is a concept that we deal with a lot as free-to-play and budget players. Here, we are specifically talking about the ability of a limited archetype to convert itself into a constructed deck, because otherwise we've drafted a bunch of cards that we might never really play again. Next up, let's talk about the accessibility of a particular archetype. And within that, there's a couple of factors here, as you can see. The first consideration is the depth of the archetype. Is this supported by a wealth, a broad depth of low rarity commons and uncommons that really make that archetype work? Or is it very dependent on just very select higher rarity cards, making it a little harder to pull off? Very often within a limited format, we start hearing about the very best deck or the very worst deck, and that affects the way people draft. So one of the issues that we need to be considering is the relative popularity of a deck. Is this going to be highly disputed within your draft pod, where 3 or maybe even 4 players are trying to move towards that and making the cards that much harder to get? Or is this an archetype that people maybe aren't really giving enough justice to, or possibly even actively avoiding, making it wide open for that one player at the table to really take advantage of? And lastly is the issue of flexibility of the archetype. If things don't go to plan, and we all know sometimes that happens more often than we'd like to admit, how easily can we flex or pivot into another archetype or style? How well do those color choices interact with other combinations so that we can make those clutch shifts when we need to? The missing component here, of course, is performance. How well a particular archetype will do within the limited environment against the other cards in that pool and the other competing archetypes. Or to put it in simpler terms, will it win? While value oftentimes takes the front seat for us as a budget community, and winning is less important. The reality is there is a component here for winning. If you are doing any sort of value draft or a token supported premium draft, really just one win makes drafting a better option than just buying packs. If you're outside of that value draft or token supported premium draft, really, again, you're looking at two, maybe more like 2.5, depending upon where you are in the history of Arena, to make that endeavor more worthwhile than buying packs. So winning is an important component here and needs to be taken into account. In the end, all of these different factors and components come together, and I tend to sort the archetypes into 3 basic tiers. Of course, the top tier is the title of the video, Top 3 Archetypes. These are the ones that I feel like our budget community needs to be focused on for the various reasons that we have just covered. It is not necessarily the top 3 best performing archetypes overall. As we have explained, there are other factors that budget players need to be mindful of. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, we have the tier 3, the decks that I recommend that you pretty actively avoid because the majority of the time it's just not going to be very beneficial for you. That having been said, of course, on any given day, any given limited event, the colors might come together for you. You might get access to really bomb-tastic cards, and anything could be playable on any given day. The middle ground is what I lovingly refer to as the backup plans, things that are not necessarily one extreme or the other, but often make good fallback points when your tier 1 plans don't come together. Maybe a color dries up, maybe you open a bomb in pack 2 and you need to shift a little bit. Those backup plans can be exactly what saves a draft for you, as opposed to being all in on the top tier aspects. Sometimes it's better to shift into a backup plan and have an overall better performance. All right, so let's start talking about the 10 2-color specific archetypes of Edge of Eternities. And we'll start things off with the Ugly. Cutting hat be damned. The Ugly is a story of red here. The fact is, red just isn't all that deep at lower rarities, and once you get past the individual stronger pieces of removal, there's really not much left for folks who spent their early picks securing value to then pick up and hobble together a particularly playable deck. So here we're looking at the Izzet Artifact Aggro, the Boros Space Stations, as well as the Rakdos Void archetypes. I would avoid these as much as possible. If you do end up having to play red, I highly recommend pairing it with a much stronger primary color, and then maybe just splashing 2 or 3 pieces of decent removal for red. And what are those stronger colors, you may be asking? Well, much the way Ugly was the story of red, the good deck archetypes are the story of green. Green has very early on, and to not much surprise, demonstrated that it is the strongest and potentially deepest color at lower rarities. In fact, I feel pretty strongly in saying that the blue-green Simic ramp deck is perhaps the strongest deck in the overall meta as far as a balanced 2-color combination goes. These all end up being very nice, and of course, the green and white Selesnya deck is all about those +1/+1 counters. While not particularly strongly presented in the starter decks, is a recurring archetype. We're seeing it over and over again, and does make it pretty valuable for building decks in the long term. And of course, if you've been paying attention, the last 4 decks then fit into mal, or that's Latin for bad. At the top of the tier 2, I'd say that green, red landers and landfall deck is probably where you want to be. Second choice, I would say, is about second spells, the blue-white deck. The Dimir blue-black artifacts kind of starts to bring up the tail end, and then the black-white go-wide deck is in the final position here of the, I believe, worth playing 7. If you haven't picked up on this, black tends to be kind of the fourth trailing color, mostly because of some weakness in the void mechanic. The mechanic itself isn't all that bad, it's just, well, it's hard to trigger reliably, which is often the case with that style of mechanic. While green is certainly top and red is certainly bottom, followed by black. The blue and white are kind of interchangeably good, so results may vary as the season progresses. You should also be aware there is somewhat of an 11th hidden archetype within the format, which cares about having multiple differently named lands. But the reality is, due to the scarcity of bonus sheets within this format being only approximately 1 in 8 packs, the idea of getting enough differently named lands in your deck and in play at the same time, along with the cards that reward you for having done so, is kind of a magical Christmas land sort of thing and not really very easy to pull off. I wouldn't give it too much concern unless it just kind of falls in your lap one draft. Which is not to say that the bonus sheet lands are not worth taking, but those are more of a collection value than going to be a limited play value. Of course, don't forget the supporting patrons will be getting a much more detailed breakdown on this limited environment, looking at virtually every single color combination that you could be looking at, not just the even 2 color combos that I cover here, as well as the limited draft impact of each and every card in these bonus sheet and special guests. So if you haven't taken a look at Patreon lately or considered being a supporter, now may be the time. And before we go, I really want to take a moment to thank my patrons for their months of continuous and reliable support here at the Stronghold. It's this kind of support that really gives me the confidence to make investments in the Stronghold, despite the fact that I'm investing money out of pocket month after month. But thank you guys. This means so much and allows me to do so much for the community. And of course, I have some suggestions for some additional content right here on the Stronghold.